Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Today, we take an essential step towards breaking the silence. For far too long, we've turned a blind eye to a hidden reality, one that lives behind closed doors, disguised by stereotypes we've normalized and enforced. It's a reality in which male targets of domestic violence remain unseen, unheard, and unprotected. The purpose of this book, Behind Closed Doors, Male Experience of Domestic Violence in the Age of Denial, is not just only to shed light on these stories, but also to spark change. The abuse men endure may not always leave visible scars, but it is no less destructive. In fact, it operates as a system of social control, not just through the abuse itself, but through societal denial of the abuse. Uh, Tonight, I want to bring these two systems of control into focus and make the case that non-physical violence must be recognized and dismantled with the urgency as physical violence. Let me begin with Tami's story, one that demonstrates just how effective abuse can be, even when no hands are laid on the target. Tami's partner weaponized fear to gain control over him in ways that words alone cannot describe. One day, she stood in front of him without clothes, began beating, scratching herself, recording it and shouting, "Stop it! Oh, that hurts." Then turned to Tami and threatened to use the recording if he's not done as he is told. Tami recalls, open quotes, "I didn't dare step out of line. I was so scared of losing face in society, of losing out professionally, and of not being seen as a victim but as a perpetrator. And this, with fear, you can hold people down and lock them in." End quote. Tami was not controlled by physical force. He was controlled by fear. Fear that he would be labeled as the abuser. Fear of losing his career. Fear that no one would believe his truth. In Behind Closed Doors, you would find harrowing stories of men subjected to this form of non-physical controls. When the female perpetrator would say, "Boo," these men, caged by fear, would jump. When she would say, "Jump," these men again, once again, caged by fear, would ask, "How high?" This is the devastating power of non-physical violence. It strips a person of autonomy and leaves them trapped in a psychological cage. And the irony? Physical strength offers no protection against it. Instead, it becomes a liability. Society's assumption that men cannot be targets of domestic violence only fuels the denial, leaving them defenseless. Then there's Denis, another survivor whose experience shows how societal denial reinforces the abuse. Denis suffered through every category of abuse outlined in the power and control wheel: physical, emotional, financial, sexual, and more. He gathered evidence of the abuse, and at times it even unfolded in front of authorities. But despite it all, he was still expected to go back home and take care of his abusive, pregnant partner. Society denied his victimhood, demanding he continue playing the role of a caregiver, roles dictated by patriarchal norms. Even his children were products of rape and reproductive coercion, a horrifying reality when he was forced into fatherhood through manipulation and deceit. Yet, despite the clear evidence and violations, society treated him as though he had no right to name his suffering. This is the second system of control: denial. It operates silently, making male targets invisible and locking them into cycles of abuse without recognition or reprieve. We've seen public outrage and swift justice in cases like Ariel Castro's, where 3 women were physically confined and tortured for a decade. Society could recognize and respond to Castro's horrific use of physical control to dominate his victims. And rightly so, his crimes demanded justice. But Tami's experience and Denis's, together with those of other men, show that non-physical control, manipulation, coercion, and psychological terror can be just as oppressive. The walls and physical restraints, more visible in female victimization, are replaced by fear and denial in male victimization. The impact on male targets is no less devastating, and the absence of recognition makes the abuse even harder to escape. We must evolve our laws and policies to recognize that control does not have no physical. We must evolve our laws and policies to recognize that control does not have to be physical to be real, and victims do not have to be women to deserve justice. The denial of male victimization has persisted for far too long. We have the power and the responsibility to change this narrative. The book outlines the following steps to dismantle the system of control and ensure that no victim is left behind. Trauma-informed care. Our services must begin with the assumption that every individual's trauma is real, whether it aligns with stereotypes or not. Trauma-informed care ensures that male targets are believed and supported from the very moment they seek help. Anti-oppressive practice. We must challenge the stereotypes and biases that perpetuate the myth that only women can be victims. This aligns with the principle of anti-oppressive practice, which seeks to dismantle systems of inequality and ensures that all people, regardless of their gender, receive the support they need. The proposed model of anti-abuse. This model asks us to focus not on the gender of the victim or the abuser, but on their actions. As Dr. Martin Luther King once pleaded, let us judge people by the content of their character, not the stereotypes attached to their identity. Every abusive behavior, whether committed by a man or woman, must be confronted. And every victim, male or female, deserves justice. Restorative justice. Where possible, we must adopt restorative justice approaches that allow victims to reclaim their power and perpetrators to take accountability for their actions. This process focuses on healing and resolution, ensuring that the harm caused by abuse is addressed holistically. More research on male victimization. Finally, we need more research. Without data, the stories of male targets will continue to be dismissed as anomalies. Research will provide the evidence needed to drive policy changes and ensure that male victimization is no longer denied. The age of denial must end. Abuse is not bound by gender, and neither should our policies, practices, or empathy be. In Dr. Lenore Walker's Cycle of Abuse and the Power and Control Wheel, all products of female survivors have taught us that there are two actors in domestic violence: the perpetrator and the victim. What separates one from the other are their actions, not their identity. This demands that our response must, and they must, reflect this reality. Behind closed doors, there are countless men like Tami and Denis, men whose stories remain untold, whose pain remains unrecognized. This book, Behind Closed Doors, Male Experience of Domestic Violence in the Age of Denial, is more than just a collection of stories. It's a call to action. It urges us to dismantle the systems of social control, both the abuse itself and the denial that follows. Every victim deserves Every person in this room has the power to make a difference. Kindly buy the book, share the stories, advocate for change. Let us demand policies that recognize and address non-physical violence, ensuring that every victim is seen, heard, and protected regardless of gender. Together, we can end the age of denial and build a society where abuse by anyone, by any means, by any form is no longer tolerated. Thank you. Now, somebody's just asking the question, so let me read. Don't you think that the authorities were trying to provide support to Denis's partner, given that she was pregnant with kids? I think that this is a good question, and let me answer it this way. I firmly believe that when women, when a woman is pregnant, they deserve the support that heaven and earth can possibly provide, without a question of the doubt. That must be said out loud. And I also believe that women themselves can better address their experiences. But when it comes to the context of domestic violence, this is actually not what I'm trying to say. Remember that in Denis's situation, the abuse started before the pregnancy, during the pregnancy, and after the pregnancy. So the question that we can also ask ourselves is this: can abuse be justified as a result of pregnancy? Remember that kids are involved. And for me, I think that there's no justification for abuse whatsoever. Now, even if we want to subscribe to the notion that the abuse is as a result of hormonal changes, we are trying to say that there are some mental health issues involved, which of course I do believe that anyone in a mental health situation should receive support without a shred of a doubt. But look at it this way: the authorities that Denis went to, they did not do any assessment. So on what basis are they even saying it is mental health? And even if it is mental health, what support did they provide to this female who was, by that definition, struggling with mental health issues, pregnant with children? They offered no support. They offered no protection to the children. They offered no protection to or support to Denis. Multiple times he went to them, and if by their standard it is even mental health, where is the support to this family? That is why I made the argument in the book that when we deny male victimization, by extension, we deny protection and support to others, including the most vulnerable of our society, the children. And I hope I answer your question in a way that it's clearer. But here's the second question: how can you explain how female frameworks can be used to further understand domestic violence of as a system of social control? Okay. Um, Again, I think that this is also a nice question. Let me explain it this way: the power and control wheel was developed from female experiences. These women came together to say abuse cannot happen to us. And when they put this framework out, they were trying to say that we are also trying to stop abuse for others. Now, this distinction is particularly relevant because despite them experiencing the horrors of abuse, they function to stop abuse They chose a path of peace actually, for themselves and for others, contrary to the actions of abusers who always try to justify abuse and also try to expand it, including towards children. This is a key distinction between abusers and victims. That is why I try to make the argument that absent self defense, there is absolutely no justification for violence. This diagram is the power and control wheel. It looks like this. It describes the broad spectrum of actions that abusers use to exert power and control over their partners. They use a combination of physical, sexual, and non-physical violence to achieve control. These highlighted sections are some selected tactics to illustrate how abusers deploy them simultaneously to achieve effective control. Kindly remember the just discussed cases of Tami and Denis. These tactics include making or carrying out threats, intimidation, playing mind games. Remember how Tami's partner used threats to control him? Humiliation, using isolation, cutting you off from your support system, making you more pliable to be controlled. Making all the big decisions. Remember reproductive coercion, pregnancy through manipulation and coercion, using children as pawns to control partners. Playing the victim. After the abuse, they shift the blame to trap you in the cycle of abuse. Let me read to you a section in the book to further illustrate. James endured more than 10 years of abuse, during which his intimate partner deployed a range of strategies to maintain control over him. False allegations, gaslighting, physical abuse, and emotional manipulation were the primary weapons in her arsenal. A particularly insidious tactic was her threat to self-harm, weaponizing her mental health to shift blame onto James and dissuade him from leaving. When her control was threatened, she escalated her abuse, falsely accusing James of violence. This could have led to devastating consequences, such as losing custody of his children, if not for the intervention of his 7-year-old daughter, whose truthful testimony contradicted her mother's lies and exposed their manipulation. James's story highlights how male targets of domestic violence can be easily entrapped within the cycle of abuse. Without the intervention of his child, James might have faced the same fate as many other male targets, isolated, disbelieved, and stripped of parental rights. His case underscores the systemic nature of abuse, where false narratives, role reversal tactics, and the strategic use of children further entrap victims. Denis's story. Denis's experience exposes the damaging stereotypes that cloud society's understanding of abuse. Because his abuser was female and pregnant, authorities excused her behavior, attributing it to hormonal changes. The reality, however, was far from this narrative. As the power and control wheel illustrates, abusers are always in control of their actions, whether through manipulation, setups, or sexual coercion. These behaviors are not byproducts of hormones. They are deliberate strategies designed to maintain dominance. Moreover, the abuse in Denis's case started long before the pregnancy and persisted long after, evolving into parental alienation and psychological warfare. Denis, like many male targets, found himself paralyzed by a system that dismissed his suffering, leaving him isolated, depressed, suicidal, and trapped. Both James and Denis's story highlight a recurring pattern that will emerge throughout this book. When male targets attempt to leave abusive relationships, they are met with a web of manipulative tactics, parental alienation, false accusations, smear campaigns, and emotional mind games. All known physical forms of violence become the tools of control. These tactics, though subtle, are remarkably effective in entrapping male targets, ensuring they remain bound within the cycle of abuse. James and Denis tried to escape only to encounter societal disbelief and institutional bias that denied them the support they need. This pattern will be evident in future chapters, revealing how male targets of domestic violence face additional barriers compared to their female counterparts. When they seek help, they are met with minimization, ridicule, and legal disadvantages. Support services, often underfunded for male targets, either subject them outright, support services, often underfunded for male targets, either reject them outright or fail to address their needs. Social attitudes rooted in stereotypes that deny men's vulnerability further entrap them, creating an environment where abuse thrives and accountability is rare. Thank you, and I hope I've answered your questions. And maybe you should continue to keep the questions coming, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much.